This week, we have again a double portion, the Torah portion of Matos and Masei, the last two portions of the book of Numbers. So we actually complete the book of Numbers this week. And next week, we will start the book of Devarim, the last book of the 5 books of Moses, of the Torah. In this week's parsha, we are discussing the final days, the final weeks in the desert, the commandments that Hashem told the Yidden, Hashem told the Jews in the desert, the final days, and the preparation. And next week's parsha, that's when we start how Moshe tells the Jews his will, his final speech, his farewell speech. And then in the end of the book of Devarim, he passes away. So really the whole book of Devarim is Moshe speaking. Almost the whole book of Devarim is Moshe speaking. In the beginning of this week's parsha, it speaks about vows. Someone who makes a vow, who promises to not to do something. He says that, let's say, I won't eat a certain object, I won't do a certain thing, I won't a certain possession, I won't derive any benefit from. So that's a vow. In this section of the Torah that speaks about the vows, it's really split into 3 parts. There's an opening verse, opening 2 verses. Then by the end, there's a summary. And in the middle, it speaks about a number of particular laws. So we're going to read a little together the parsha, the few verses. So let's see. I'll share the screen. Right, here we have it. Wait, that's the long run. Here, that's it. All right. The parsha begins. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing the Lord has commanded." So this Torah portion is addressed to the heads of the tribes, to the leaders. As we'll soon see, even though all the Torah is equally taught to all the Jews, there's a specific reason why we're addressing this portion of Torah, these laws, to the heads of the tribes. And it says, if a man makes a vow to the Lord or makes an oath to prohibit himself, he shall not violate his word. According to whatever comes out of his mouth, he shall do. Right? So this is a very basic principle commanding us that if someone makes a vow, someone promises, he should not disregard what he said, but rather he should fulfill and carry through with his vow. Then the Torah goes on to discuss in the next 15 or so verses, discuss particular laws that if a wife makes a vow that would affect the relationship, in other words, it affects her husband, so something which is something personal, so that would affect their relationship, so then he has the right to revoke or to cancel that vow. A husband is not able to make a vow that would affect what his wife, their personal relationship, because he is obligated by the Torah to take care of the needs of his wife. That's the ksuva. But if the other way around, if she makes a vow, so then he has the ability to revoke it. Only the first day that he hears it, there's particular laws. So it goes on and discusses a few particular laws about revoking and canceling the vows and promises. And that's the next 15 or so verses. And then in verse 17, it concludes and summarizes, these are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses concerning man and his wife, a father and his daughter, in her youth, while in her father's house. So here it summarizes, in short, the particular laws that are discussed from verse 4 through 16. A obvious question that we realize right away is that there's something very important missing from this verse 17. What happened to the opening verse? What happened to verse 3 that says that when a person must keep his vow? What happened to that commandment? Seemingly, keeping one's vow is much more important to the particular ways and circumstances when he's able to revoke and cancel the vow that he made, the promise that he made. Seemingly, that is more important, and that is the main idea of what the seemingly that's a very important commandment and the main commandment here. And the Torah is just also telling us, oh, just by the way, there's a way to revoke the vow, to cancel it in a place that it's necessary. But if that's the case, what happened to that commandment? The basic commandment of guarding our speech and guarding and fulfilling our promises, where did that disappear to? Why is that lacking from the summary? So this is the first thing the first question that we're going to discuss today. Why in the summary, when the Torah summarizes the laws of vows, it is missing, it's lacking, there's something very apparent. There's a law that's very apparently lacking from the summary, the law of keeping your vow. Where did that go? Why are we only speaking about the laws of revoking the vow? Any thoughts?
Well, it said it in the beginning that you have to keep your vows.
Right, but in the summary, it said everything in the beginning. But in the summary, it's summarizing seemingly the particular laws which are necessary. So why are we not summarizing also the idea of keeping your vows? The question is, why is the commandment of keeping your vows missing from the summary? So in a very interesting way, the Rebbe explains that really we are reading the verse wrong. We have to read it differently, drastically different. Typically, when you read the verse, we understand it as a commandment to keep our promises. All right, we'll put it back up on the screen. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or makes an oath to prohibit himself, he shall not violate his word. According to whatever comes out of his mouth, he shall do. So simply understood, you would understand that it's saying, do not violate your word. It's a commandment not to violate your word. However, perhaps there's a slightly different way of reading the verse, where the verse is not coming to tell us a commandment, oh, just by the way, you have to keep your vows. But rather, the verse is coming to tell us this, that you know, that when you make a vow, you shall keep your vow, because that is, like we'll soon see how we know that. I'm letting you know, just by the way, there are certain cases where you're able to revoke and cancel that vow, that promise. But it's not, so in other words, it's not really a commandment to keep your words, because that's a given. Rather, it's an introduction to what we're about to say, ways to revoke your vow. And therefore what comes out is that if we want to if we want to, put a title to this portion of the parsha, to these few verses, the title would be the laws of revoking a vow, not the laws of the vow, because this that you have to keep your promises, we already know. Okay, where do we know? Why is it so obvious that we have to keep our promises? Where do we know that from? So it says, where do we know that from? It comes up time and time again that one should keep their promises. First of all, it is something that's morally obligated. In other words, it's immoral that when someone promises and takes upon himself a vow, oath, he should keep it. Then the Rebbe brings, it's also there's a verse that says midvar sheker tirchak. You should distance yourself from lying. So included in distancing yourself from lying is keeping your vows. Another case, we see a number of times Jacob, he promised Hashem that if you save me, I would, she says he'll give a tithe. And then Hashem said, okay, now it's time for you to fulfill your vow. We find that the Jews, just 2 weeks ago in Parshas, in the Torah portion of Pinchas, of Chukas, the Jews, when they were fighting the mighty kings of Sichon, they said that if we win this war, we are going to donate. They made a vow that we're going to donate all of their belongings to Hashem. And they kept it. There are certain laws that have to do with a vow. Someone who promises to donate to the tabernacle, to the holy temple, the value of someone's value, the worth of someone, or someone who, the Nazirite is also a vow that he takes upon himself not to drink wine, not to cut his hair. So in all these cases, we see time and time again throughout the Torah that keeping your word is a very important thing. And keeping your vows is important. It has weight. So therefore, the Torah doesn't have to come to you by the end of the 4th book, oh, I command you to keep a vow. That is a given. That's something we already know. What Torah does tell you that there are certain circumstances that even though you made the vow, but you're able to nullify it, you're able to annul it. So really, this portion, the correct way to categorize these few verses is not about that we have to keep the vows, but rather about annulling the vows. Because that is something that is unique. That is something that we won't know without the Torah telling us. But on the other hand, keeping the vow, that's something that we don't need Torah to tell us because it's already embedded in the last 4 books that we learned time and time again, that keeping a vow is something very important. If this is the case, we could understand why in the summary, the Torah doesn't speak about keeping the vow, because that is a given. That is not the new laws that the Torah is telling us. The new laws, the objective of this portion of these few verses is to tell us when, in certain circumstances, a vow may be annulled. Not that we have to keep the vow. So this would be a beautiful explanation why the keeping the vow, the commandment to keep the vow is lacking from the summary, because what the Torah is summarizing is the new ideas that we learned, the new laws that we learned, which all pertain to annulling the vow. The fact that we have to keep the vow, that's a given. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions?
Rabbi, a vow is the same as a promise, is it not?
What, a vow?
Yes.
It's very similar to a promise. There are small differences between a promise and a vow, but generally speaking, it's a promise. Meaning the vows that we're speaking about here is more that you're treating a certain object as if it's holy and removed from you. A promise is more that you would or you won't do something. A vow is more that you're speaking about the object, that I make a vow, I take upon myself a vow that this object is as if it's holy for me and I can't derive any benefit from it. But generally speaking, it's the same. It falls in the same category.
Right.
With this in mind, we could understand another interesting idea that the rabbis teach from the opening verse of this week's Torah portion. So I'm going to share the screen again. So again, the opening verse is verse 2. Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes of the children of Israel, saying, "This is the thing the Lord commanded." So it's addressed, the Torah portion is addressed to the heads of the tribes. Why is it addressed to the heads of the tribes, to the leaders, which is a very select few of the Jews? So Rashi says, this is the Rashi, he's quoting from earlier Talmudic sources. He quotes the few words of the verse, the heads of the tribes, and he says, he honored the heads of the tribes by teaching them first, and only later the rest of the Israelites. How do we know that he did so with other statements? Meaning, the whole Torah Moshe taught all the Jews. However, first he taught it to the heads of the tribes, to the leaders, and then only afterwards would he teach it to the rest of the Jews. So meaning the leaders heard everything twice, so they should remember it better. So how do we know it's always true that every time he always taught it to the heads of the tribes and then to the rest of the nation? So we bring another verse, for it says, Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the princes of the community, the heads of the tribes, returned to him, and Moses would speak to them. Afterwards, all the children of Israel would draw near and hear what Moshe had to say, the commandments of God to Moshe. So what comes out is that really there is in all the commandments of the Torah, there's a certain order that Moshe taught it. First, he taught it to Aaron and his children. Then he taught it to the heads of the tribes. And only afterwards would he teach it to the whole Jewish nation. Okay, so there's an order. Over here, the Torah is specifying, sort of saying the second stage, that he taught it to the heads of the tribes. Seemingly, if in the whole Torah, it was always, everything was taught to the heads of the tribes, and then the Jewish nation as a whole. So why then, over here particularly, does Moshe, say, does the Torah say that he's teaching it to the heads of the tribes? So Rashi explains, he asks, if so, why the scriptures see fit to mention it here? So he explains, it is to teach us that annulment of vows may be performed by a single expert, and if no single expert is available, it may be annulled by 3 laymen. So the reason why this portion of the Torah it stresses by the beginning that it was told to the heads of the tribes, that's to teach us that the heads of the tribes, which are leaders and experts in Jewish law, they have a special, so to speak, power, that they have the ability to annul the vows in a case that's fit, in a case that it's justified. Just like in a case when they're not around, so then 3 regular people could annul it. All right, so I understand that since this portion is addressed to the heads of the tribes, it makes sense that there's a special link and a special connection and status that the heads of the tribes have and the leaders have regarding these verses, because it's addressed to them. So they have a certain special status here. However, I would think that what should they have? In other words, what should be their special status here? In helping people keep their vows, keep their promises. Why are we learning that their special status here is that they're able to annul the vows? Their status here should be that they're able to keep the vows, to help people keep the vows. Isn't keeping a vow much more important than annulling a vow? But based on what we said earlier, we could understand. We could understand why we're learning. Yeah, question?
Yes. If the heads of the tribes were taught the Torah twice, they had a much better understanding of what was expected of them. Is that correct? And
yes.
If the regular people had an issue or a problem, or if they had made a vow and they were sorry that they couldn't keep it, did the heads of the tribe, did they act as if it's okay, Hashem is going to forgive you? Is that how they act? It doesn't seem like they had the strength of it. I don't know. Do you understand what I'm asking? I'm asking if the heads of the tribes, didn't they have to have a consensus that, yes, you can annul that oath?
Right. So there are many circumstances and rules when an oath, when a vow could be annulled. It's not just like, oh, I decided, I made a promise, and then a few days later I woke up on the left side, and now I'm not interested. Okay. There are many rules and ways that are discussed. There's actually a whole tractate in the Talmud that discusses this topic. When exactly, what qualifies as a vow, when could a vow be annulled?
Right.
So they have to follow those rules, obviously.
It's a lot more complicated.
Right. It's not just like, oh, I'm not in the mood, so therefore let's just call them up and on speed dial. And no, so that it wasn't just like that. But on the other hand, they do have a special status that they did have the ability that when they found fit and when according to the rules and regulations it was fit to annul the vows, they have the ability to annul it. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Why are we learning, and how do we know that? From the fact that this Torah portion is addressed to them.
Okay.
Since it's addressed to them, so that means they have a special power that they're able to annul the vows. What we're trying to figure out, okay, it's addressed to them, but maybe they have a special power to encourage people to keep their vows, right? Why are we learning from the fact that it's addressed to them that they're able to annul people's vows? So on that we're saying, it depends how you categorize this portion of the Torah. If you categorize the laws here about keeping and annulling vows, then our question is legitimate. However, if the main objective here is that the idea of annulling vows, canceling the vows, and that's what the Torah is telling us here. That's the unique laws. Every portion of the Torah, whenever Torah tells us laws, it's telling us something new, something that we won't necessarily know without the Torah telling us. So specifically here, if the unique laws that the Torah is trying to say is not that we have to keep the vows, because that we already know from the first book, from when Jacob made a vow, and he was supposed to keep it, and he was told to keep it, and he did keep it. But rather what Torah is coming to tell us here is that in certain circumstances, there is the power to annul vows. So then when it's addressing it to the elders of the nation, to the leaders of the nation, what we're trying to say, that the leaders have a certain power in annulling vows, which is the topic here. Okay? So that is the second point. So again, the first point, yeah.
I wanted to know, so we have a choice to annul the vows. A man has a choice to annul his vows. Does the woman have a choice to annul her vows?
Right. So actually, the correct the exact case here is not that a man could annul his own vows. A person can't annul his own vows. If someone made a vow, man or woman, they have to keep it.
But there is a way for him to do
Oh,
it.
wait. So the only way a person could annul his own vows is by going to someone else, to a leader, to annul it. And that'll be the same by a man or woman.
The woman can go to the leaders too?
Of course.
Okay, I didn't get it.
Yeah, sure. So it works. This that the leaders have the power to annul the vows, it's the same.
Okay.
Same man and woman, yeah. There's no difference. So far we spoke 2 points. The first point was that in the summary, it seems like we're missing a very important detail. We're missing the detail of the commandment to keep the vows. So now we said, Torah here is not coming to tell us a commandment to keep the vows. What Torah here is trying to say, it's more of an introduction to this, that a person should keep his vows. In certain circumstances, he's able to annul the vows. And that's the objective of the portion of the Torah here. And therefore, the way to categorize the laws here is the laws of annulling vows, not the laws of vows in general, because the idea to keep the vows, we know that earlier. And therefore, it's understood why it's missing from the summary, because that's not the unique aspects, the unique laws that the Torah is trying to discuss here. And what comes out is that the idea of keeping a vow is a given. That's something that doesn't have to be taught specially over here. Then we pointed out another thing, that this portion is addressed to the elders of the nation. So we learned something special out, that this portion is connected. These laws are connected to the elders of the nation, to the experts. In what aspect? So I could take it 2 directions. Either I could say that in the aspect of keeping vows, or I could take it in the direction of that they're able to annul vows in certain circumstances. So if the point of the Torah is commanding us to keep the vows, then the way to take it, the way to understand this special addressing to the elders of the nation is regarding keeping the vows. But since we just explained that keeping the vows, that's something we know. That's not the idea that the Torah is trying to convey here. The idea that the Torah is trying to convey here, that in certain circumstances, a person is able to annul his vows. So therefore, it follows logically that when we're connecting, when addressing this portion, these laws to the elders of the nation, implying that they have a special connection to these laws. The special connection is regarding annulling vows, that they have the ability in the proper circumstances to annul a vow that someone makes. Okay, clear?
Yes, that's more clear.
All right, you're welcome. Now, we're going to focus on a few sayings in the Talmud that have contradictory sayings that imply sort of opposites regarding keeping a vow, regarding making a vow. If I ask you, is it a good thing for someone to make a vow? Is that the proper thing? So before you call out, let's see a few passages in the Talmud, and we'll see what the Talmudic scholars thought about people making or keeping vows, which again generally means in our case that the person, let's say, says, I make a vow that I'm not to have any benefit from, let's say, a certain type of food, or from a certain object, or from any worldly pleasures. So at the bottom of the source sheet, we have A, B, C, and D. Four sayings. The first, A, in the future, every person would be called to account for the pleasures that he encountered and did not partake of. This is directly speaking about someone who takes upon himself a vow.
Can I ask a question, Rebbe?
Sure.
I don't quite get the concept of why does a person have to make a vow? Can't he just say to himself, okay, I'm going to do this and that and keep it and do it? What's the point in making a vow?
That's a good question. So he really could keep it. He really could make a decision, a resolution that I'm going to do or not do something and keep it. But sometimes, as we'll soon see, a person has a hard time to keep up with his resolutions. So he might want to really tie himself into and commit to, let's say, to refrain from a certain thing or object. And therefore he makes a vow that it is forbidden for him to derive pleasure from that object. Right? So it's like an extra, an extra fence, extra gate.
So we are weak and we cannot control ourselves, and therefore we have to make a vow.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, so let's go back to our sources.
I just wanted to add to what Ben said. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Ben, I would object to saying if a person's weak. Sometimes when you say something, publicly, with witnesses, it just strengthens your commitment to yourself, that you did that, other people heard you, and now you've got more obligation to keep it. And that's not necessarily that they're weak. It just, in another sense, could be strengthening for what you're trying to accomplish or what you're saying.
But you don't have to do it in front of anybody.
No, you don't have to.
You can do it all by yourself, and it's still a vow.
I agree. You can certainly do it by yourself, but I just object to the word weak, because I think that, if you feel strongly and you want to reaffirm it, not just to yourself, but, saying it in front of witnesses, that just makes your resolve stronger. To me, my opinion.
So these are actually, I think both opinions are right, and we'll soon get to it, how these are actually two sides of a coin. We'll see in a few minutes exactly how we reconcile why would someone want to make a vow and take upon themselves totally to be removed, or that not to derive any pleasure from a object or something.
Okay.
So we'll see in a moment.
Also, I was going to say that in regards to what Ben was saying, a resolution is something that a person makes to himself, whereas a vow is something that a person promises to Hashem to do something.
And if I can add to the conversation.
Sure.
I define making a vow, especially to Hashem, would be verbalized and not necessarily an idea. And by making a statement is a commitment in fact. And that really puts the onus on you to perform than just saying it and then dismissing it out of hand if you just don't want to deal with it. So when I read what's written in the Talmud, that's what I get. People don't think about what they're going to say to Hashem. They make a statement. It's an ongoing conversation. That's the way I interpret it.
All right.
David?
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you everyone for their input. Let's just read a few passages, and then I think the conversation will get more exciting.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So let's share a second. All right. So we have the first two passages is sort of negative about vows. In the future, every person will be called to account for the pleasures that he encountered, but did not partake of. Okay, so in other words, what right do you have to, why are you reframing yourself from having pleasures from the, whatever it is, you should take use of what you're able to have. B, it says it is for someone who used to take upon himself many vows. It says they told him, is that
absorb it as much as I can. Yeah, this is creating a little problem. I have to keep thinking.
Is that what the
There's a little
Torah?
extraneous conversation going on. Can you mute people, please?
Yeah, I got it. So is that B? They told someone that used to take upon himself many vows. Is that which the Torah has forbidden not enough for you, that you must seek to prohibit yourself from other things as well? There's many prohibitions in the Torah. Why are you viewing and looking and searching to take upon yourself more than you need? That's on the one side, on the one hand. On the other hand, vows are a fence for obedience. Meaning, if you want to separate yourself, you want to control yourself, vows is the best way. That's the fence to be able to control yourself. D, sanctify yourself with that which is permitted to you. Meaning, even though it's permitted to you, that doesn't mean you should refrain from it. You should indulge in it. Rather, you should refrain yourself from it. So if we read A, B, C, and D, all these four passages one after another, we get somewhat confused. So what's the idea here? Sanctify yourself in what is permitted to you, meaning even though it's permitted, you should still sanctify yourself, you should still remove yourself from it. And vows are actually a good way to obtain self-control. Or on the other hand, Torah has forbidden, why isn't Torah, on the other hand, like for B, is it not enough what Torah has already forbidden that you're looking to take upon yourself more things? So how do we go about, which direction should we take it? Or what's the message here from these contradicting sources? How do you reconcile these sources? So perhaps one way to reconcile, one approach, which I think touches upon a few of the ideas that were mentioned earlier, maybe there are other approaches, is the following. Everything in the world could be split into three categories regarding the laws of the Torah, how the laws pertaining to the laws of the Torah. Things that we must do. Things that we are permitted to do. And things that we are forbidden to do. Right? So there are three types of actions. Things that we are obligated, permitted, and forbidden. This is true regarding, let's say, foods. There's foods that we are obligated to eat. For example, matzah on Passover. We eat matzah, the unleavened bread. That's an obligation. That's a mitzvah, a commandment from Hashem. Then there is food that we are permitted to eat, all the kosher food. Then there are things that we are forbidden from eating, non-kosher food. That's regarding eating. Same too is regarding pleasures. There are pleasures. There are certain actions that we should do, certain actions we're not allowed to do, and certain actions we're allowed to do, but it's up to us. We're permitted. It's not an obligation. It's not prohibition. We're permitted to do it. It's in between. So these are the three categories that all the actions of the world, all the objects that there are could be split, could fall under these three categories. And I think there's a Tanya class. So I think in Tanya, this idea is discussed in length, how there are things that are holy, things which are commandments of Hashem. There are things which are forbidden. They're not holy, meaning they go against Hashem. They go against godliness. And then there are things that are in between, meaning if we use them out properly, we can elevate them and include them in holiness. If we don't use them out properly, we could be dragged down from it and we drag down the object, right? So that's the three categories that are discussed in Tanya and are true in our day-to-day life. Now, the difference between these three categories is that something which is an obligation for us. Those are things that we have to do to fulfill our mission. We have a mission in the world to bring more godliness to the world. The way we bring more godliness is through studying Torah, what we're doing right now, and performing mitzvot, performing good deeds, performing the commandments of Hashem. So those are actions that are directly enhance our mission. And we need to fulfill those actions in order to fulfill our mission. Then there are actions which are forbidden. They are detrimental for our mission. Things that Hashem told us not to do. Okay. Then there are things in between. Those things in between, it depends. If we're able to elevate them and connect them with service of Hashem, then they help us in our mission. If we don't use them properly, then it could tamper our mission and hold us back from fulfilling our mission. And really, this middle category is the most fluid, is the hardest to categorize, because it really depends how a person treats it, how a person acts upon it. So let's say worldly pleasures. On the one hand, worldly pleasures, most of them are permitted. So it depends how a person uses it. A person could indulge himself in it until it is in an unhealthy way, in a physically unhealthy way, or in a spiritual unhealthy way, a way that would disconnect him from his source, disconnect him from his mission, that he'll forget why he's here, what his purpose in life is. Or a person on the contrary, he could use worldly pleasures to enhance his mission, to have a clear mind for studying Torah, to connect those objects or those properties with a mitzvah, and to bring godliness into his life. So this middle ground could really be somewhat vague and not clear in what way it is, in which direction it's going. So someone who has the ability and the power to use those pleasures for service of Hashem, and it doesn't tamper his clarity and his mission. So then, on the contrary, that's when we say you don't have a right to hold yourself back from partaking in those pleasures, because they would help you and enhance your service of Hashem. But on the other hand, someone who, if he is indulged in those pleasures, he would forget, and it would make blurry his mission, and it will make him lose his focus. So then he has to refrain from partaking in those pleasures. That's when we say sanctify yourself, separate yourself from something, even things that are permitted to you. If you're not able to use them out and utilize them in the correct way. And that's when a vow comes in. There are some people which are able to refrain from doing things even without a vow. But someone who is on a certain aspect, in some way in a lower level, meaning he's not able to use those pleasures properly, so then he should refrain from it. And if he can't refrain just by resolution, so then a vow is a very good way for refraining from it. So in a certain sense, the objective here is, what is the best way? Someone who could use those pleasures and not need to make a vow. And not only doesn't have to make a vow, he could use them out for the proper purpose. But someone who can't, so then a vow is a very good way to refrain himself from getting sucked into the overindulgence in those pleasures. We're speaking obviously here all in a spiritual sense, but I think in a physical sense, we also have this idea when, let's say there's a certain food which let's say carbs or gluten. So it's most people, we need we need bread to live. But someone who unfortunately has a hard time, let's say, controlling himself eating, let's say, whenever it comes to certain foods, and he overeats, so then he would want to refrain himself in an absolute way from those foods because he can't control himself. Now, if he would be able to eat on a moderate level, those particular foods, so then of course that would be the best thing. But since he's not able to, so then he would refrain himself totally from those foods. So in a similar level would be, in a similar way would be when we're speaking here in a more spiritual sense, in our service to Hashem, that there are certain pleasures which the overindulgence may have a negative effect on our purpose and mission in life. So someone who is able to handle both, so then that will be the best thing, that he should utilize the physical world and derive all the pleasures that he's able to have and connect with the most things possible to godliness. But someone who can't, who's not holding by that level, so then he should take a vow or separate himself from it without taking a vow. And until he's on the level that he's able to indulge in those pleasures and not get sucked into it, and just opposite, elevate those pleasures and connect it to the service of Hashem. So this would explain the two opposite approaches or statements that we have in the Talmud. Sometimes we have these statements on the praising or taking vows, and sometimes we have these statements which have some sort of negative connotation to taking vows. And the difference is, what level is the person on? Is he on a level that this particular thing would not tamper his connection with Hashem, so that he should not take a vow? And just opposite, he's not allowed to take a vow because he should be able to use it. He should use that and connect it to godliness and not refrain from deriving benefit from it. However, if it's something which he's not holding on a level, he's not able to elevate that object, to connect that object with godliness, so then he should refrain from that object and refrain from that idea. So that would explain how taking a vow, in other words, the general idea that we're trying to say here is that we have to, on the one hand, be balanced, and therefore the idea here is not to separate yourself, and someone should only eat stale bread and a little bit of water. A healthy balance is important. But together with the healthy balance, a person also has to be truthful by himself and truthfully know what his level is, and is this something which is an overindulgence, an unnecessary indulgence, that may be something that I should refrain from. So the key here is, the idea that we get from these few passages is balance and being truth to ourselves, where we're holding and what we need. Is this clear? All right, so we could take this idea a step further. As we mentioned at the beginning of the class, when was the commandments about annulling vows told to the Jewish nation? It was commanded to them right before they entered the land of Israel. Why? Is there a connection there? So the answer is yes, obviously. What's the connection? So we spoke a number of times. We spoke by the story of the spies, a little bit after the story of Korach, how, generally speaking, the general difference between being in the desert and entering the land of Israel is that in the desert, the Jews were separated from worldly matters, and they totally focused on their connection to Hashem. They studied all day. They didn't have any worldly distractions, didn't have any worldly worries. responsibilities, everything was taken care of for them. All they had to do is complain. No, they didn't have to complain. All they had to do is study Torah and do what Hashem wanted. But however, when they entered the land of Israel, that's when everything shifted. That's when their mission of making the world a dwelling place for Hashem, bringing godliness into this world, that's when it started. That's when they started to have regular lives, and they had to worry about a livelihood, and they had to find jobs. Many of them were farmers, different jobs. So that's when the regular day-to-day life, mundane life started. But really, that's where the purpose is. That's where the purpose of creation is. The purpose of creation is not being in the desert, is not being separated from the worldly matters, but rather in the world and connecting it with godliness. Right? That's the idea that we spoke many times. And that's generally the shift that shifted from being in the desert, from wandering in the desert, to settling in the land of Israel, where they had to do with the land. These two stages could be compared to accepting upon yourself a vow, which means I'm separating from worldly matters, from pleasures, and I'm disconnecting from the pleasures of the world because I don't want it to suck me in, to annulling the vow, which means that at this point I feel that I have the power to not only not be sucked in by the worldly pleasures, but on the contrary, to elevate it and to uplift it. So that's why this idea of annulling the vows, this commandment was said right before they entered the land of Israel, because really that is the general idea and concept of entering the land of Israel, meaning taking the worldly pleasures and making the world, the physical world, into a dwelling place and connecting it with godliness, into a dwelling place for Hashem and connecting it with godliness. So that's perhaps one of the reasons why this set of commandments was said, particularly in this time. Yeah.
I think that the main thing, the change was that once they get into Israel, they'll all become landowners. So each one, they're not going to look for a job, they're going to have a job to handle their own land.
Correct. But that also comes with a big responsibility that you have to handle. Comparing that to the time of the desert when they didn't have to handle the land because they didn't need land. Everything was taken care of for them. So yeah, that is correct, that they became landowners and therefore they had to handle the land. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I just want to.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Phyllis.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I don't think that everybody had the zechut to be a landowner in Israel. I'm sure they must have had to have some other jobs. I'm judging, of course, from the situation as I see it now. That's one question. But the other question I have, it's very serious and it's somewhat off point, but an emergency situation has come up in our lives. And I have to know exactly what we can allow a goy or a goya to do on Shabbat in terms of cleanup, as opposed to ourselves. What is prohibited? I mean, I know a lot of things are prohibited for us, but could they come in and clean floors? And is there a way you can arrange to pay them in such a manner that you don't violate Shabbat?
We are learning Alchot Shabbat.
I'm sorry?
We are learning Alchot Shabbat in another class.
I know, but I have to ask while he's here because he is an expert on it.
All right, so the first question was everyone landowners? So the answer is the land was split in, for every family got a portion of the land. And there could be certain circumstances of people that didn't have land or didn't own land. They didn't get that like a convert maybe that converted later, so he came to the Jewish nation later. But generally speaking, everyone had land. Was there other jobs? I imagine there was. I imagine people did all different types of things. But owning land, at least everyone had a right to a certain portion of the land.
And excuse me, I mean, as a Levite, we would have our own functions in and around the temple, so we wouldn't have to worry about the land then.
Right. So the Levites had, there's a number of cities designated for them, but they didn't have the regular portion of the land. They didn't have. That is correct. Regarding your second question, so there may be, it really depends on what exactly the malacha, what work they're doing and how it's set up. But I think we should discuss it after. If you give me a call, I'll speak about it. Okay.
What number?
248 890 4558.
4558. Thank you very, very much,
Sure.
Rabbi.
All right. Any other questions? Okay,
I have a question. I have a comment that I think
sure.
the 40 years that was spent in the desert was also, I think, a cleansing and to really, which of the Jewish people were willing to love Hashem and only listen to him, only do the commandments. I really believe that the people that were in the desert, there were other people on the outside of the desert, but we believe in one God, and I think it was very important that time in the desert, extremely important for lots of reasons.
Yeah, correct. That was actually when they prepared themselves for entering the land of Israel. That was like a reinforcement and they prepared that wandering and being excluded from exclusiveness actually prepared them and gave them the ability and the strength to continue and properly settle the land of Israel.
Correct.
That is correct. All right. Any other comments? All right, so stop here. Everyone have a good afternoon and hope to see everyone next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. You too, Susan.
Thank you.